Good afternoon. This is Lisa Daniels with Windustry and the Midwest Wind Energy Center. And the Midwest Wind Energy Center is presenting the webinar today. It is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Nodi. Lisa Nodi is the USDA Rural Development Regional Energy Coordinator for the Midwest. Much of her region is the same as the Midwest Wind Energy Center region, so we are very happy to have her with us. As just a small informal piece of introduction, I'd like to say that I've known Lisa Nodi for a number of years, and she has been instrumental in helping this Rural Energy for America program get off the ground starting in 2002, and it changed and has grown over the years with the various Farm Bill revisions, and we are extremely pleased to have Lisa with us to go through the funding opportunity as it stands today.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to present information on our REAP program this afternoon. This presentation is going to focus on the renewable energy side of the Rural Energy for America program. As many of you may be already familiar with, there's an energy efficiency side, but this presentation is going to primarily focus on the renewable energy side of it. So with that, we'll get into our material. First of all, it's always good to talk a little bit about why we're here and what the history of the program has been. It was actually first established in the 2002 Farm Bill, and then in 2008 it was amended and they added the Feasibility Study and the Energy Audit and Renewable Energy Development Assistance sides to the program, kind of added some additional pillars to it to help it work the way that they wanted it to. And then it was reauthorized in the 2014 Farm Bill and provided $50 million worth of mandatory funding per year. And then it also required 3 application tiers, which we'll talk a little more about as we get into the presentation. But that's a little bit of the history. There's 2 components to the Rural Energy for America program. The first component is energy audits and renewable energy development assistance, what we commonly refer to as EA-RETA, and that's available to state and local governments, universities and institutions of higher learning, rural electric co-ops, public power utilities, resource and conservation councils were added just in the 2014 Farm Bill. And what that side of REAP does is it provides energy audits and renewable energy development assistance to rural small businesses and ag producers, kind of, providing them the tools that they need to make the decisions about incorporating the renewable energy system or making the energy efficiency improvements that they're contemplating. And then the other side is the renewable energy systems and energy efficiency improvements, the RES-EEI side of the program. The feasibility study component was removed in the 2014 Farm Bill, so we no longer have that piece. Through the program, there's various types of assistance that you can get. You can get guaranteed loan assistance, grants. There is a set-aside for grants specifically for $20,000 or less, the grant requests of $20,000 or less. And then there's unrestricted funds, funds that you have access to regardless of the amount. So if you compete in a set-aside and for some reason aren't selected, or your application doesn't come in as being in line with one of the set-asides, then you can compete in the unrestriction. And then the guaranteed loan grant combinations, where you're applying for a combination of guaranteed loans and grants. The funding side of the program, the Farm Bill we mentioned provided $50 million per year. And then for 2015, we're administering the 2014 and 2015 funds. Because of the changes that were required in the Farm Bill and the guidelines that needed to be updated to incorporate those, the 2014 funds were held until the new rule could be rolled out, and those 2014 funds could be administered under the new rule. The EA RETA funds is $2 million. The application window for those closes today, but we do have $2 million available for that program. Guaranteed loan funds, approximately $200 million. And then the set aside for 20,000 or less is right at 10 million, and then we have unrestricted grants of 68 million. And we do have then any annually appropriated funds, any funds that Congress sees fit to direct to the program on an annual basis. So those can be added to the 50 million that's already incorporated into the Farm Bill. The purpose of the REAP program is to assist rural small businesses and ag producers in purchasing and installing renewable energy systems or energy efficiency improvements. So that's kind of the crux that we developed. Rural small business is a private entity, either a sole proprietor, a partnership, or a corporation. And then the other eligible pool is agriculture producers. So we'll take a look at what we mean by each of those two groups. A rural small business qualifies using the Small Business Administration size standards. Typically what we refer to as the NAICS code, the North American Industry Classification Code. And depending on what type of business it is, it has a threshold that's either tied to annual receipts or to the number of employees. And then new to this, the new rule is SBA's alternative size standard, which allows applicants to demonstrate their eligibility by showing that they have a maximum tangible net worth of not more than $15 million and average net income of not more than $5 million. So the alternative size standard is new to the program, but it does help to bring our eligibility criteria in line with SBA's. When we look at the ag producer side, we're looking at ag producers that are directly engaged in the production of agriculture products, where they garner 50% or more of their gross income from agriculture products. Continuing on to other eligibility criteria, applicants must own or control the site on which they're proposing to install the project on or make the improvements to. Applicants are expected to have sufficient revenues and expenses available for the proposed project. Each applicant is expected to have the legal authority necessary to apply for and carry out the project. And then they need to be registered in a system called sam.gov, which is a system that is registered, and they come out with DUNS numbers, cage codes, different things that are required to receive federal grants. And we have to maintain the registration until the grant is paid out. So we've covered who's eligible to receive assistance for renewable energy system or energy efficiency improvements. Let's look at what it actually takes for a project to be eligible. So here we're going to get into some of the changes in the new recently released rule. The first and most common is the purchase and installation of a renewable energy system. The purchase of a refurbished renewable energy system is now also eligible. Refurbished is defined as a system that has been brought in and gone through with any worn parts replaced, and typically comes out with some type of a warranty. Retrofitting of renewable energy systems is also eligible. So if I have an existing system that has not been functioning properly, or maybe it's not functioning at all, maybe I have a wind turbine that I decommissioned for some reason, and now I want to look at a retrofit with a new generator and recommissioning it, that could be eligible under the retrofitting. And then, of course, the energy efficiency improvements. Commercially available technology. For a project to be eligible for REAP assistance, the technology must be commercially available. Commercially available means that the system has a proven operating history and proven performance data, that it's based on an established design and installation procedure and is replicable. There's professional service providers who are familiar with the installation procedures, that we have service available to properly maintain and operate the system, spare parts are available, and there's a warranty that's valid within the United States. The second option then that's new to this new rule is demonstrating commercially availability to have it certified by a recognized organization with a certification standard. So examples of these certifications would include the Small Wind Certification Council, the Solar Rating and Certification Corporation, Florida Solar and Energy Center, American Wind Energy Association, and Intertech Small Certification Program. But for a project to be considered for REAP program assistance, the technology must be commercially available. We're no longer funding pre-commercial technologies. Technical merit is something that we have always had in the program. Technical merit is where we get into the details of the project. It includes a detailed explanation of the project, how it ties into the operation, the qualifications of those that have been identified to do the work. If it's a renewable energy system, it needs a resource assessment to analyze the resource that is going to convert to energy and support the energy generation projections. In determining the technical merit, we'll also look at the information on whether the equipment is available, the timeline is being proposed to develop the project is realistic, the information presents that the project is or the equipment is available, and using that information, we'll make a determination on technical merit. And so based on that information, a project will either pass or fail. If the project fails, it cannot compete for funds. So we have to go back and look at resolving why it failed, or if we have the ability to resolve it. And then at that point, it can come back in and compete. But we can't compete projects that don't have technical merit. That has been incorporated as part of the eligibility criteria in the new rule instead of a scoring criteria that we had in the previous program. So. We look at the types of projects that can qualify. We look at bioenergy projects such as pellet mills, biomass boilers, ethanol and biodiesel facilities. Anaerobic digesters can also be funded through the program. Systems that take animal or food waste and convert it to methane, then convert the methane into electricity. Geothermal systems that use thermal energy directly from the ground. Those are eligible, as well as hydrogen systems where the hydrogen is derived from biomass or water using wind, solar, ocean, geothermal, or hydroelectric systems. Solar, wind, and hydroelectric, and then the broad category of energy efficiency. And I wanted to talk a little bit about hybrids because hybrids come into play when we have a combination of two or more renewable energy technologies that are incorporated into a unified system to support a single project. For example, a wind-solar system to produce electricity for a facility would be classified as a hybrid, and hybrids are eligible technologies. So for those of you who have been involved in the program and had some exposure, in the past you can recall that REAP cannot provide benefits to a residence. So this section is going to give us some options when that occurs. When we have a residence, we want to install a renewable energy system and a residence is co-located with the renewable energy system. So, for example, we have an ag producer who wants to install a solar array on his farm site. The farm site is also the site where the residence is located. So we'll look at what options are available to them and what types of documentation go with each of those options. So the first option would be to install a second meter. So the house pulls from the grid and the solar system replaces some or all of the electricity consumed by the farming operation. Pretty clean, but it's not always practical. So a second option was added, and that is to, actually there's three options. So a second option might be to demonstrate to us that the system is properly sized for the farming operation. So for example, the system is projected to generate 15,000 kilowatt hours and the operation needs all of that or more to operate. So that would not require a second meter. But now the third option that's available under this new guideline is as part of the application, the ag producer could demonstrate that the operation uses 51% or more of the energy projected to be generated by the system. So, okay, we're here. So in this example, we're going to install a wind turbine where the business and residents are co-located. The business will consume, we'll just say 60% of the power, and the residence is going to consume the remaining 40%. So we would prorate the 60% of the cost of the system, and that becomes the basis for the grant. So if you're calculating a 25% grant, you'd take 60% of the project costs and multiply your 25% times that to come up with your grant amount, maximum grant amount. Okay, next slide. Some of the ineligible expenses that go along with REAP, a few things that we cannot do with the program. Only post-application expenses are eligible. Expenses that are incurred prior to the application submittal are not eligible. We cannot assist with the purchase or improvements of agriculture tillage equipment, any used equipment or vehicles, and then, of course, any gambling or anything illegal remains ineligible. And the same with conflict of interest. Anything that constitutes even the appearance of a conflict of interest is not eligible. So, okay, next slide. There are 3 tiers. Part of the new rule was incorporating a 3-tier application threshold into the program, so we have done that. We have the first threshold, which is projects with project costs of $80,000 or less, projects with costs that are less than $200,000 but more than $80,000, and then projects with costs of $200,000 or greater. Okay, next slide. So shortly, as in later this afternoon, we are in the process of finishing up the forms that will relate to each of those 3 thresholds. So there will be applications that will walk an applicant through the material that's required for those 3 thresholds. So there's one form that's for the 80,000 or less projects, one form that's for the projects with less than 200,000 but more than 80,000, and then another form that's for the over 200,000. So they're forms that have been developed with the guidance inside, contained in it. So the first, whatever, 6 pages are, fillable information pages, and the balance of the form is what we want in those pages or those blocks. So we think it's much more user-friendly, a streamlined approach to the program, and we're excited to hear the feedback when we can evaluate the use of those. Okay, next slide. When projects are being developed, we want to make sure that they include total project costs. That's all the costs associated with a completed project we want to see included in the eligible costs. So, for example, a wind turbine proposal should include all the costs, including turbine, tower, foundation, electrical, and anything else that we haven't mentioned. Any of the costs that are integral to the completed project need to be part of that project proposal. Next slide. Feasibility studies are required if we have projects of 200,000 or above, renewable energy systems with project costs of 200,000 or greater. So that is something that we had in the previous reg, just bringing that out because that certainly has implications. The other thing is, I need that slide again. Financial information, when we get into that 200,000 or greater threshold, it does call for financial information, both historical, current, and also pro forma financial information. So a little bit different as you go from that 200,000 threshold to 200,000 or greater. So, yeah, next slide. By definition, a renewable energy site assessment is a report provided to a rural small business or ag producer providing information regarding and recommendations for the use of a commercially available renewable energy technology into that rural small business or ag producer's operation. So the report must be prepared by a qualified consultant and must contain information on project description, resource assessment, economic assessment, as outlined in their respective appendices for each of those thresholds. But if you have a renewable site assessment that meets the definition, then it can be substituted as part of your technical report. And that would be the part that pertains to the project description, resource assessment, economic assessment. So if you've already garnered a renewable energy site assessment, that can be part of the application and avoid some of the technical report. Okay, next slide. Applications can be submitted year-round. There are dates that are deadlines for projects to enable competitions, but applications can be submitted at any time. The agency is subject to NEPA environmental reviews, so as soon as you know that you have a project that involves construction, we encourage you to start discussions with the agency so we can talk about any environmental requirements that are tied to the project. There are competition dates that are actually in the regulation. We're no longer operating off of competitions defined in Federal Register notices, and we think that that is going to allow the public the ability to plan as well as the agency to make sure that its resources are in place. So those application dates they're a little bit different for 2015 because of the time frames involved with the new rule. But for 2015, we have one application deadline of April 30th and a second one of June 30th. So those are good for 2015. Then fiscal year 2016 starts what we call a typical year, and those application deadlines are October 30th and April 30th, and they're hardwired into the rules, so you should be able to plan on those dates, and we should be able to plan on those dates. So some things that are good to know about the process. The maximum grant assistance for any fiscal year is $750,000. Grants are a maximum of 25% of total eligible project costs. Renewable energy systems, the minimum grant is $2,500 and the maximum is $500,000. And on the energy efficiency side, the minimum is $1,500 and the maximum is $250,000. So those are some things that are important as you're looking at putting together applications. On the guaranteed loan and combination side, REAP can cover up to 75% of the total eligible project costs. The maximum guaranteed loan is $25 million, and then it can go down to the minimum of $5,000. It's also important that you understand that this is a reimbursement grant. So you're going to complete the project, submit the invoices, proof of payment, and then we're going to pay out on the grant. And that's part of what we're going to get into when we look at scoring is documentation that you have the funds available to cover the portion of the project that's not included in the REAP proposal. Projects are subject to a grant agreement. Before we disperse funds, we have an executed grant agreement. So that's an agreement between the agency and the grantee pertaining to the project. And the other thing that's important to know is that there are reporting requirements that go with the program. Part of our performance measures and how we show impact of the program is the energy generation and energy savings reports. Some projects have jobs tied to them, things like that that are captured in those reports. So it is imperative that if someone agrees to accept the grant, that they understand that they're subject to the reporting requirements also. The reporting requirements for a renewable energy system are 3 calendar years following installation of the system, and energy efficiency is 2 years following installation of the system. So then the reporting requirements fall away. The grant agreement is still potentially in effect depending on the project, but the reporting requirements will fall away after that. Guaranteed loans, there's a lot of emphasis on guaranteed loans this year. We have quite a bit more funding on the guaranteed loan side than we have had in previous years. So we're looking for projects trying to maximize the use of our guaranteed loan funds. So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about that. The minimum amount of a guaranteed loan, again, is $5,000. The maximum amount is $25 million. The guaranteed percent, it's a loss guarantee. So if a lender was to experience a loss on the loan, the government could potentially step in for 85%. If the loan was $600,000 or less, 80% for loans over $600,000 up to $5 million, and 70% for loans over $5 million but up to $10 million, and then 60% for loans over $10 million. So that's fairly generous for a typical guaranteed loan program. Next slide. Working capital can be loans up to 7 years, machinery and equipment 15 years, or the useful life. Real estate can go up to 30 years. The interest rate is fixed or variable depending on what's negotiated with the lender. but it can be adjusted quarterly, but no more frequently. What can it do for a borrower, an applicant? It can help in providing stability and growth through energy efficiency improvements or renewable energy utilization. It can provide the ability to receive higher amounts. A lender may be capped at a certain loan limit, and this may enable them to go above that loan limit. Competitive interest rates. A lot of times lenders will see the guarantee as protection against risk, so they may offer a more competitive rate and certainly longer repayment terms. So we have an eligible applicant, we have an eligible project, we understand the requirements of what's involved. So what happens to it when we submit an application? So first, we at USDA will evaluate it and make sure that it meets all the project and eligibility criteria. Then we score it so it can compete with other applications, and be aware that this is still a competitive program. So it is a competitive process. Applications compete with other applications for funds. So we think it's important that you understand what's involved in that competition. So we'll spend a little bit of time looking at scoring, what goes into scoring it and competing a project. Before we do, though, states receive allocations, and there's a lot of focus on getting states to utilize their allocations to make sure that, REAP touches each state and can allow various states to evolve with renewable energy and energy efficiency improvements. So scoring does become very important as you compete with other projects in the state. Okay, so we talked about applications either come in as grant and loan combinations, guaranteed loans only, or grants only. So we compete projects, grant and loan combinations basically compete together, and then guaranteed loans compete together. And there's a maximum of 100 points. Okay, so next slide. So we're going to talk about the scoring criteria. There are some changes in the scoring criteria from what we have had in the past. Not a lot, but a few. So the first scoring criteria is worth a maximum of 25 points, and it's actually broken down into two what we call sub-criteria. So the first sub-criteria is quantity of energy generated or saved per REAP dollar invested, and it's worth a maximum of 10 points. And then quantity of energy replaced, saved, or generated, maximum of 15 points. So the second criteria is very similar to what we have had in the past, but the first one is an addition. So next slide. So we'll take a look at sub-criteria number 1. It is where we're looking at the quantity of energy generated or saved per REAP dollar requested. So for renewable energy systems, we're looking at the projected total energy generated, what we call EG, by the renewable energy system. We convert it to BTUs, and we divide it by the REAP dollars invested. And the way that's broken out in terms of a score is if it's less than 50,000 BTUs generated per grant dollar or loan dollar, either one, then it gets 10 points, then it's rounded to the nearest hundredth of a point. And then if it's greater than 50,000 BTUs generated per grant dollar or loan dollar, it gets the full 10 points. So the next slide is an illustration of that. The next slide. In this example, no, back one. In this example, we have a turbine. It's projected to produce 125,000 kilowatt hours a year. The grant request is 60,000. So we convert the 125,000 kilowatt hours a year into BTUs. So that's our first calculation there, where we come up with 426.5 million BTUs. And then we divide that by the $60,000 grant request, which is 7,108 BTUs per dollar. So we would prorate that with our 10 points, and that would equate to 1.42 points. So sub-criteria number 2, and that we talked about, is fairly similar to what we've been doing, but it does have a maximum of 15 points now, which is a little more than what we've had. So let's go to the next slide. Looking at an energy replacement project, so we're primarily intended for self-use. The energy replacement, if it's greater than 0 up to 25%, it gets 5 points. If it's 25% or greater up to 50%, it gets 10 points. And then over 50% is 15 points. So we're looking at a renewable energy generation, the most recent 12-month period, divided by the energy consumed over the same period. To qualify for energy replacement, the project must provide documentation on prior use. Projects involving new construction and being installed to serve a new facility may be classified as energy replacement only if we can document previous energy use from a facility with approximately the same size. And then it goes on to clarify that same size is in that 10% plus or minus range. If the estimated energy production equals more than 150% of the energy requirements of the applicant, then we move it into the energy generation part of the scoring. So this is just talking about replacement. So next slide. Energy generation is a system that's proposed or its intention is to produce energy, and not any self-use or more than that 150%. So then it's the 10 points. Environmental benefits, there's a maximum of 5 points for this criteria. This is a little bit different. We've had environmental benefit points before, but it involved the third-party verification, tying it to some type of standard or requirement that was in place. This is changed to the applicant must document in the application that the project has a positive effect on any of the 3 areas: resource conservation, which looks at water, soil, and forest; public health, which looks at potable water, air quality; environment in general, compliance with EPA's renewable fuel standard, greenhouse gas emissions, or particulate matter. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So to get environmental benefits points, if the proposed project addresses a positive impact in one of the 3 areas, it gets 1 point. If it is proposed as an impact in 2 of the 3, then it gets 3 points. And if the proposed project has a positive impact in all 3 areas, then it gets 5 points. So a little bit different presentation on environmental benefits, and then it has gone from 10 points to 5 points. So, next slide, I believe. Commitment of funds. We've always had matching funds. This is to kind of make sure that if we award grant projects, that funds are committed to do the balance of the project if we go ahead and commit our funds to it. This has been moved to 20 points in this criteria. It's based on the percentage of written commitment that an applicant brings forth in his application and make sure that the funding sources are clearly documented to identify their commitment. So we'll look at that a little more in the next slide. We calculate the percentage of written commitment by looking at the total amount of funds that are committed divided by the total amount that's required. So if they produce evidence that 100% of the funds are committed, they get the full 20 points. If it's less than 100 but more than 50, then we prorate out the points and round it. And if it's less than 50%, no points are awarded. So the next slide walks us through a little bit more detail of that. We have here an example of a project with project cost of $28,000. The grant request is $7,000, and the application contains documentation of $15,000. So to calculate the percentage of written commitment, we'd take our $28,000 project cost, subtract out the $7,000 grant request, which would give us $21,000 funds are needed. So to calculate the percentage of written commitment, we would take the $15,000 and divide it by the $21,000 that's needed. So it becomes 71.43%, and prorate that out, and it equates to 8.57 points. So there's an example of how it's been applied. The next scoring criteria is the size of the ag producer or rural small business. This again mirrors one of the scoring criteria in the previous rule, but there's a little bit of a change to it to balance ag producers and rural small businesses. So I believe it's still the same 10 points. I think it was 10 points in the old. It's based on the size of the applicant's agriculture operation or business concern compared to SBA's size standard by NAICS code. So as I said, it's changing to kind of level the playing field between ag producers and rural small businesses. So let's take a look at that a little bit more. Next slide, please. In terms of how we award points, if it's a third or less of the maximum size, then they get 10 points. If it's greater than a third, up to and including 2/3 of the maximum size, then it's 5 points. If it's larger than 2/3 of the maximum size, it gets 0 points. So let's look at an example of that. We have an ag producer. Most of the ag producer NAICS codes are capped at $750,000 in annual receipts. We have an ag producer with annual receipts of $250,000. We would take the $250,000, divide it by the $750 maximum threshold, and you would be at 33.33, which is a third of the size standard, so he would get 10 points. The next example, we have an ag producer with annual receipts of $400,000. 400,000 divided by 750,000 is 0.533. More than 1/3 of the size standard, but less than 2/3, so he would get 5 points. So there's some examples of how that has been applied. Previous grants, that is also mirrors one of the scoring criteria in the previous guidelines. However, the criteria has been increased to 15 points, and it's based on whether the applicant has received a grant or guaranteed loan under the REAP, Renewable Energy System or Energy Efficiency Program. So let's look at the next slide, how that's applied. If an ag producer has never received a grant or loan guarantee, he gets 15 points. If he has not received a grant or guaranteed loan within the 2 previous federal fiscal years, he gets 5 points. And if the applicant has received a grant or a guaranteed loan within the 2 previous federal fiscal years, he gets 0 points. So again, more emphasis put on bringing more people into the program, spreading the benefit around. Simple payback, a maximum of 15 points for this criteria. Points will be awarded for the renewable energy system or energy efficiency only in one category. So even if your renewable energy system saves energy, it's still just evaluated as a renewable energy system. Okay, next slide. We determine payback, simple payback for renewable energy system generation for off-site use. We're not going to, it doesn't qualify as a replacement, so we're going to score it as a generation project, evaluate it as a generation project. We look at eligible costs divided by typical year earnings before we look at interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization for the project only. So we'll look at some more detail on that. All energy-related revenue and byproduct streams produced by the system for a typical year are valued at fair market value. The income remaining after all projected obligations are paid. The agency accepts the project's typical year, which is going to be after the operating is stabilized, the project is in full production. You know, we've kind of worked through the commissioning issues. Does not include credits, tax credits, carbon credits, renewable energy credits, and any one-time construction and investment-related benefits. So that's a little bit of a change from what we've done previously. Let's see. So this slide is looking at a replacement eligible project cost divided by the dollar value of the energy that we're reducing or replacing. Let's look at that a little closer. When we're looking at the energy reduced or replaced, we're incorporating the monetary value of the reduced or replaced energy using a constant value of the price of energy. The value must be based on the actual price paid over the same time using historical use. So actual historical use is converted to BTUs for the most recent 12, 24, 36, 48, or 36 consecutive months. Projected energy use of the renewable energy system, if it's been in place for the original building or equipment for the same period. Those can all be incorporated into the energy reduced. Okay, next slide. A renewable energy system that's replacing 100% of use of the historical use. That looks like the same slide. Let's go ahead. So looking at an example, this is an example of how we would calculate simple payback on a generation project. We have a small business installing an 80 kW wind turbine, projecting to produce 140,000 kilowatt hours, and we're going to sell it at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Turnkey eligible project cost $152,000. So we give some other information. Okay, let's go to the next slide where we do the calculations. Total project costs are $152,000. EBITDA is $18,000, and our payback is 8.44 years. And we calculate that by the $152,000 project cost divided by the $140,000 that we're going to generate by 15 cents a kilowatt hour is equal to $21,000. And then if you went back to a previous slide, you'd see the $3,000 O&M listed. So that comes out to our $18,000, which is divided by the 152 to come out to 8.44 years. So this is a replacement example. So moving away from the generation, we have a project that's going to primarily replace our on-site use. Again, we have an 80 kW turbine, 140,000 kilowatt hours estimated production. In this case, we're going to offset a portion of our existing energy and sell the excess to the utility at a rate of 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour. We're looking at our average consumption being 80,000 kilowatt hours at an average cost of 13 cents. So turnkey eligible project costs are still 152. In this example, our O&M are $500. So let's go to the next slide where we're doing the simple payback calculations. In this example, we're using 80,000 of the production, 80,000 of the kilowatt hours of the production, and 60,000 is going to be sold. So our rate is 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour, so $4,500 from the 60,000 that we're selling. The 80,000 that we're using in this example is valued at 13 cents a kilowatt hour, so that's 10.4. So the two combined equal 14.9. We divide the 142,000 by the 14,900 and comes out to 10.21 years. So it would get the 10 points. So when we look at and awarding the points, if the simple payback of the proposed project is less than 10 years, it gets the 15 points. 10 years but not including 15 is 10 points. 15 up to but not including 15 up to and including 25 is 5 points, and then over 25 years is 0 points. So we've expanded the years that you can still receive points over the previous year also, the previous guidelines. State director points have a maximum of 10 points. That is comparable to what we've seen, but let's go to the next slide. There are more areas that a state director can award points for, either the state director or the administrator. Next slide. If an application is for, the one previous to that. If the application is for an underrepresented technology, say a state has never funded a wind project and they want to fund a wind project. So, to entice a wind project, they might say, well, we'll award 10 extra points if we can, attract a wind project. So that would be an underrepresented technology example. Selecting an application that helps achieve geographic diversity. Maybe there's one area of the state that we've never done a project in, so we want to entice a project by saying, we'll award 10 points to anything in, the northeast part of the state or something to that effect. Nope, I'm not done with that slide. Applicant is a member of an underserved or unserved population. Again, the state's going to have to look at what they've been doing in the past. Is there some sector that they have not served, some, a group, that they're trying to reach to, they can award the points to that. Selecting an application that helps further presidential initiative or Secretary of Agriculture priorities, those are listed on the website. The state directors have the ability to award points for those. If the proposed project is located in an impoverished area and has experienced long-term population decline or loss of employment, they also have the ability to award points. So if you have projects in multiple states, it would probably be a good idea to get a handle on what the state director priority points are. The administrator priority points come into play if funds are unused by the state, they're harvested in, and we do national pools, and the administrator has the ability to look at what's been done and craft administrator points for projects that she wants to promote. So that's what the administrator points pertain to. So how do we handle funding applications? The grant funds are distributed out to the states. Each state has an allocation. Grants for $20,000 or less and are restricted. Applications that cannot be funded with the state allocations will compete for national funds. So that's all dependent on how states use their funds and what's available to harvest back for national funds. But that's kind of how it works, is you compete your projects in the state, and then they can compete in the national pool. Guaranteed loans, we have monthly funding cycles for guaranteed loans. Those are held in the national office, so the states can work with getting them prepared and then submitting them for funding. Next slide. We've kind of covered this, applications at any time. You know, even though we've talked about grant and guaranteed loan deadlines, if your application doesn't come in until after the deadline, it just goes in line for the next competition. So we want to encourage, you know, if you have a good project, get it, you know, worked up, get the application submitted, and then it'll just compete the next time. We have energy coordinators in each state. If anyone needs help, needs information on things that pertain to that state, here's the link to the energy coordinators. You can always email me. I can get you to the state energy coordinator, you know, whatever works. But we do have energy coordinators in each state. We talked about submitting applications any time of the year. Applications compete for funding based on score throughout the year. Yeah, we've talked about that. Okay, next slide. So that is the REAP website. Should be able to get most of the information that you need at this site. General information, information on the program, funding is all based there. So, next slide. I think that is just my contact information. If you're not aware of who your energy coordinator is, you have any questions, I can get you back to that energy coordinator or answer them. But that is pretty much what I have for the presentation. So thank you very much for being very patient.
Lisa, this has been excellent, and I hope we haven't worn you out. But this has been very good. Thank you very much. And we have several good questions that have come in. And I'll start out with one of them. As a landowner interested in converting my ranch to a renewable energy, renewable energy, could I use the $20,000 grant specific for a feasibility study?
The 2014 Farm Bill rescinded the feasibility study component of REAP, so we no longer have the capacity to do feasibility studies.
Okay, that's a good question. Okay. The next question is, I can be either a small business or ag producer. In my case, I'm a small business. I'm a small business which leases the ag production. Does this qualify? So
I guess we'd have to know a little bit more about the project. One of the things we talked about is we have to have site control. So if I am going to replace some irrigation motors, I would need to have control of those irrigation motors that I installed, or be able to pick them up and take them with me if I lost control of the land that they were on.
Yeah, or the other thing is, if they, depending on where they want to put their, or what type of a project it is, they would just have to maybe leave that piece of land out of their lease production, out of their lease for ag production, so that they could have land control, right?
Yeah, I think we just need to know more about what the project they were looking at doing.
I agree. Okay. Is the renewable energy site assessment required for all 3 tiers of project applications?
Actually, the renewable energy site assessment is not a requirement at all. It's an alternative. If you have a renewable energy site assessment, it can substitute for some of the criteria in the technical report. The reason we bring this up is, the renewable energy development assistance. We talked about the energy audit and renewable energy development assistance side of the program. And there might be site assessments available through that program. I mean, it's based on, number one, if anybody in your area applied, and number two, if they applied, was their proposal to do site assessment. But if they did and they furnished you a site assessment, there is the ability to substitute the site assessment for some of the documentation in the application.
Great. All right, now this is, what are the qualifiers for the loans?
Qualifiers for the loans. The basic criteria is the same as what we talked about. They have to qualify as an ag producer or a rural small business, have control, capacity, that kind of thing. So the basic criteria are the same. And then the rest of it really, a lot of it depends on the proposal that's negotiated with the lender. It's a lender-driven program, so you meet the lender requirements, and then the lender brings the package to us.
Okay. All right. Next question. Do non-agriculture businesses qualify with little land for the loans? Okay, so do non-agricultural businesses, so a rural small business, that has a small amount of land, do they qualify for loans as well?
I think they could. I'm thinking of a laundromat that wants to incorporate solar thermal into their operation. Whether or not they have land isn't really an issue. It's whether they, control the laundromat and have the ability to do the project. So I would say yes.
Okay, and clearly they have to be in an official area considered rural.
Right. Projects need to be located in rural areas. Mm-hmm.
Right. All right. This question might be more technical. The program can make it difficult for new turbines to get REAP grants. Any possible relief to that problem?
Well, I would go back to our commercially available discussion. In the new rule, we're only funding commercially available projects. So, the definition of commercially available is that we have proven operating history with proven data. So.
Okay. That's great. What numbers? Okay. All right, next question. Regarding receipt of REAP grant in the previous fiscal years. Please give an example of how that is calculated. If the official fiscal year awarded, or when the grant monies were actually received, i.e., here's the applicant applied under fiscal year 2012 program and was awarded a grant. The check was not paid out until fiscal year 2013 in July. If applying in fiscal year 2015 program, do they get these points or not?
That's a good question. Let me see what that says.
And we can defer this to later if it's too specific?
I would have to look at the exact wording on that, but we can get there. It's just whether we get there right now or not. Yes.
Okay. So why don't we defer that question, because we do have everybody's email on this webinar, and we could just have a collection of questions that we didn't get to, because they're still coming in, and I'm not sure we'll get to them all anyway. Is there any kind of checklist available for a vendor to use in helping a customer in determining if they qualify for a REAP grant or a loan? You know, this might be involved in the template. Did you say that there's going to be some templates released?
There are application templates, yes. There are actually application forms that can be used in developing applications. But I'm not sure that they get, that it's an abbreviated version, like at least what I'm envisioning in this question. So I'm not aware of any, but I also don't think it would be that difficult for us to develop.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful question. Maybe because a lot of times the vendors will be working very closely with their customers to make the feasibility of the project happen. Okay, I've heard many concerns regarding stray voltage with renewable energy systems. Is there anywhere on the website addressing this concern for livestock producers? No, I don't think so.
I'm not aware of any, no.
Okay. Could a business use the grant funds to purchase shares in a community solar gardens? This is going to be a complicated topic, because it's a community solar garden is a new construct in Minnesota, and it's where it's where the landowner doesn't really own the project.
Yeah, I'm familiar somewhat with the structure. That needs a little bit more background when we answer that one.
Okay, more background on that one. It's a good question, but I think it will go by which project. Every community solar garden project is going to be different. What areas qualify as rural?
Typically, it is areas with a human population of 50,000 or less, non-contiguous to a metropolitan area. There is a rural area locator map. I don't know that I have it in this presentation, but we can get that to you if you have any concerns about a project being rural. We can put that in the Q&A.
Okay, great. And then also, this question goes according to, like, based on your experience and the strength of historical applications now under the new scoring guidelines, what do you expect the minimum scoring that should be reached to have a chance at competing for grant funds? You know, for instance, in states in the Midwest, where Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, where they really do have a lot of applications coming in. And, you know, and how tight do you think the awards are going to be compared to how many applications you get? Do you think are going to be awarded? Yeah.
I think that the states that have had a good, solid, successful program are going to be very competitive. There are some states that are still building their capacity, and I think it may not be as competitive in some of those states, but I think the Midwest will still be very competitive. But at the same time, this is the year where we have 2 years worth of funding to administer. So I think that if you have a good project and we go through the scoring criteria and we think it scores well, which I think is kind of the crux of the question, what's scoring well, I would put it forward, because a lot of it is going to be based on things that we won't know until these application windows close.
Great. Is it possible that vendors may need to get a good grant writer, and are grant writers available or allowed in this process?
Grant writers are available and they are allowed, yes.
Great. Could we get a copy of the slides to use with our notes? And yes, the slides will be available along with the complete webinar, and they'll be separate as well. Is your terminology very competitive, meaning 88 points out of 100, 95 points out of 100? Define.
Oh.
Everybody's looking for, how many pages does the report need to be and how many points?
Yeah, and we just don't know. And again, I go back to a lot of it's going to depend on the states, and whether there's a lot of applications there, and it's going to be a fiercely competitive environment, or if it's states that are building the program and the competition isn't quite as strict, and even beyond that, applications have the ability to compete at the national office, so from pooled funds. So, again, we're tied to how states are going to use those funds. And I guess, the best thing I can say is if you don't try, you have no opportunity.
So we're saying go for it.
That's my advice. If you have a well planned out project and can put it forward to where it works out at all and makes sense, I encourage people to develop the applications and file them.
Excellent. So Lisa, I think that is the end of all of our questions, and I think we have really, been very much honored by all of your really good information here this afternoon, and we've had people on this very attentive on this webinar for the last hour and 25 minutes here. So are there any last comments you'd like to share with everybody, or anything else?
I could just recap a few things, and that's, the importance of engaging the energy coordinators in each state. They're really going to be in the best position to to help you position applications for, for the funds that they have. So I think that, and again, just to reiterate that this is the year that we've got 14 and 15 funds. If you've got projects that are developed and it's just a case of getting them, getting the applications completed, I would encourage you to push forward with that. So I'm not sure beyond that, even if you're developing applications and, the April 30th window is closed, go ahead and get them in. Even if it's after the June 30th window, we'll go ahead and work those up and compete those when in the next funding round. So continuous application cycle.
All right. So it sounds like if you have a good project, this is the year to submit it in. So everybody get your ducks in a row and get your pencil sharpened. This is your moment here. Lisa, thank you very much for a wonderful webinar, and I think we all know a lot more than we did about the REAP program, and especially all of the changes this year. Now, one question I had, and I wasn't sure that I understood this. Are there templates that are coming out for the applications, or is the short form so succinct now that it doesn't need a template?
There are applications. They're actually forms now.
Okay.
So contact your energy coordinator, contact me. We had thought they were going to be on our forms website today, and we're going to fall a little bit short of that, but we will distribute those until we can get them posted.
Okay. So we're very, very pleased with everything about this program and how it's developed and how it's grown. And thank you very much for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. And we look forward to further contacts and happy renewable energy implementing for the Midwest and for the whole U.S. Thank you very much, Lisa. And that will conclude our program for today, and we will be, the Midwest Wind Energy Center will be holding monthly over the next couple of years here. This is a whole new program, and it's funded by the Wind Exchange program out of NREL and the U.S. Department of Energy. Thank you very much for your time today.